Happy Thanksgiving from Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. Performing your hosterly duties once again, I am Dusty O'Connell. Joining me is our in-house analyst and blogger extraordinaire, actually fresh off the taping of episode 102, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good. I may be a little bit more exhausted for this one, but I kind of doubt it, even though we're recording at like 3 a.m. One thing to note, Dusty has not been able to listen to the previous episode, and we don't have any new information since the previous episode. So Dusty may accidentally rehash some things from the Tuesday episode. Just indulge him.
Well, first of all, you are implying that I ever listen to episodes that James hosts.
You definitely do, because you get offended when we insult you.
Well, okay, so maybe there have been a couple.
We laid some traps that you tripped. Trap tripper.
I will say, though, that James has failed at tripping any traps that I have set for him. So
That's not a pointer. That's bad. That's a bad thing, because it means he doesn't listen.
That's bad for him. Good for me. Good for you. It's good for us.
It's bad for all of us, because how could we have quality control when the one producer who wasn't in the show itself will not quality control? Whatever, man. We're at peak quality, right? So it doesn't matter.
Leaving aside that he did perform some very crucial quality control in the episode with Justice Mosqueda.
Very important, yes. That was actually pretty clutch.
So you know what, James? Yeah, he does his thing. It's fine, I guess. He probably can't be bothered to listen to the show that he is on 30% as much as I am. We actually did run the numbers. It wasn't as close as I had thought. I have hosted this show many more times than he has, and I will continue to do so.
I was surprised too, given Dusty's perpetual absence.
But it's not, the numbers established it's not perpetual.
Oh, hey, man, goodness. What, are you just a stat head? I'm just using my ear test, man. Always superior to the stats.
All right, look, the only way that any of this is relevant is that I can do a much briefer listener support promo, because James has already gone through the numerous list of new donors. And I just want to, tip my cap to everybody who has contributed to the show and really made me feel like we're doing something good. Like, it's one thing to make a podcast and really love it and have it be good, but just have nobody listen to it. Nobody. 20 listens a week. And to have a show like Norse Code, where we're becoming not only a useful tool for Vikings fans, but a part of kind of the Vikings conversation, like a bigger part of the community. Well, part of that is due to us, of course, because with basically zero preparation, we still kill it. Part of it is due to you guys, the listeners, for making us part of your community. And when we see, the dollars trickle in, I mean, maybe we had to bribe you with candy. We promise you there's no panel ban, but candy bribe or no, you guys have kind of brought us in and made us part of the larger Vikings community. Now I see tweets on Twitter that don't have any of our Twitter handles or any Norse Code hashtags or anything that are referencing Norse Code episodes. And it's just man, we're part of the conversation now. And that, to me, that makes me feel like we need to kind of step up our game as you guys continue to step up your desire for us to step up our game. Does that make any sense?
It does, but it also means that you search our name on Twitter, which is kind of weird.
Well, no, I mean, I just look at, dude, I use TweetDeck. And I just
so you have a whole column open of searches for our name. Yeah, that's definitely more well-adjusted, you're right.
I only have a mentions column.
Then why do you use TweetDeck if you only have a mentions column?
I don't only have... Okay. I have more than one column.
Why do you lie about this then? Jesus.
All right. At any rate, thank you so much, folks. If any of you who have not contributed would like to, NorseCodePodcast.com is the place to do it. There's a link to our PayPal page where you can make a one-time donation, or you can become a continuing sponsor by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/NorseCode. We are really killing it in the last month or so, and we would love to send you some candy, so please contribute. I understand you have updated all of the listener supporters on the candy situation.
Yep, because like I said earlier, we're recording this immediately after the previous show because we all have Thanksgiving duties that are not podcast related, so we're recording this one a little bit early. There's no new update for you listening on like Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. So the update remains the same. We've shipped out the first batch. I will have to make out the second batch so that I can send them out to you. I love that I have so much to make because actually it turns out these are super easy to make, and they've been wonderful in terms of listener engagement, which of course is something that we love, but also it's been wonderful in terms of the feedback that we're getting, and to be frank, the fact that this has led to more money. So. I love making more, but we do have to make more. So if you haven't received yours yet, by the time you listen to this, it is probably been made and cooling, or been made cooled, and in the mail. One of those two.
So please continue to donate so that Arif has to make more candy, is what I am taking away from this.
Correct. This is like so. We shouldn't say that we're selling candy though, because that introduces a whole host of regulations that I am not familiar with nor willing to follow.
These are merely gifts from strangers.
Yes,
strangers with candy, you might say.
What a fantastic movie and show, by the way. But
unless we are not personal strangers to you, in which case it is friends with candy.
Exactly. The safest of all things.
Yes, thank you for making that clear. I imagine no Vikings news has transpired in the last 2 hours, which I think is the gap between the taping of the last episode and this one.
Yeah, well, I mean, thankfully, because the only news that had transpired between that, and we actually caught it at the end of the show, was non-Vikings related. And as you'd expect, any news that comes at midnight or 1 a.m. was pretty bad. And that was the Stedman Bailey shooting. By the time you listen to this, we'll have an update on his status. But as of this recording, we heard that it was not fatal, that he was going to have the surgery in the morning, and that because it's not life-threatening, we can all be pretty happy. He got shot in the head twice, maybe in the hip once. Hopefully he will be well on the road to recovery by the time you listen to this. But no new Vikings news. Our Vikings shooting already happened a year ago, and that player is phenomenal, Linval Joseph. So hopefully Stedman Bailey, just like Chris Johnson and Linval Joseph, comes back better than ever.
Shot twice in head. Wow.
Yeah, non-fatal. Non-fatal. That's incredible.
Adam Schefter's tweet from an hour ago says critical but stable conditions. So here's to modern medical science. All right, enough of this. Let's get to what people listen for, and that would be the Atlanta Falcons preview.
Yes, so I already did a podcast with at FalcFans and his podcast. We did a pretty good job, I think, breaking down things from the Vikings side because they asked me a bunch of Vikings questions. Unfortunately, we were unable to get a Falcons guest because, as you might have surmised, we're recording this at 3 in the morning. Their time, it would be 4 in the morning, so it's very difficult for us to get a guest. But I do follow a lot of Falcons people on Twitter. I did talk about the Falcons a lot already, so hopefully we'll be able to break down a lot about the nature of the Falcons offense, players in the Falcons offense, and how they've changed since the last time the Vikings played them. One thing that's interesting, did you know the last time they played Adrian Peterson, I believe, was in 2011, because after that they played Toby Gerhart and then Jerick McKinnon / Matt Asiata. So despite the fact that the Vikings have played the Falcons multiple times since 2011, this will be their first exposure to Adrian Peterson in 4 years. They haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher all year, I believe, but Falcons fans are pretty confident that Adrian Peterson will be the first of those. So I think that this game is setting up well for the Vikings. What do you think, Dusty?
So, uh, necessary, asterisks about PFF grades aside,
Mm.
Atlanta's defense performs poorly, we'll say, against the pass, but somewhat better against the run. I guess I am not necessarily familiar with the individuals responsible, but I would actually like to hear your thoughts a lot on who is potentially going to exploit Adrian Peterson's desire to run up the middle, and also who Adrian Peterson should be targeting in terms of people he can shoulder and run past.
Yeah, well, I think the rookie Vic Beasley, who at the beginning of the year was pretty astounding. He was in a defensive rookie of the year conversation before, others like Stephon Anthony and Marcus Peters kind of overtook him.
Well, and he
Uh,
was a little bit of conversation for a potential pickup for the Vikings on draft day, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because he had the kind of athleticism and the kind of experience to play off-ball linebacker, which is kind of where you would ask him to be, kind of like how Anthony Barr moved from an edge defender to an off-ball linebacker role with the Vikings. Vic Beasley could have been sort of in the same area, and because his reaction time is so good off the ball, that would have been potentially an interesting move. But Falcons drafted before the Vikings, and the Vikings seemed pretty intent on getting Trey Wayne, so that didn't happen. But Vic Beasley, because he's a rookie, does have a lot of rookie problems, and in this case, despite being still a pretty good pass rusher this year, although not getting the sacks that he got at the beginning of the year, he's not as astounding against the run. So it's likely that Matt Kalil is going to line up across from him. Matt Kalil, as a run blocker, has actually been all right this year. Obviously, the big question mark about Matt Kalil going into this year was about his pass protection, which also, last game aside, has been pretty all right. But as a run blocker, him lining up against Vic Beasley is actually probably a winning matchup. I believe when Vic Beasley is rotated out, they're going to have Adrian Claiborne in there. That was somebody that we talked about as a potential picker for the Vikings, although he does play a lot more inside. People like Jonathan Babineau, those are people that you could probably run at. On the other side, unfortunately, you've got Tyson Jackson. I think he's a former Kansas City first-round pick. You've got Rashid Hageman, the first-round pick, who is extremely athletic and extremely inconsistent. Some games he's really good. Some games he's really bad. You've got Paul Soliai, who they got from Miami. You've got Croy Bierman, who's been around forever, who's actually like Brian Robinson and Rob Ninkovich in a way, because he's very, very good against the run, and he'll get pressures, but he won't finish and get sacks. And on occasion, you'll even see O'Brien Schofield. So those guys are pretty good against the run, but their linebackers are actually, once you get past that defensive line, their linebackers are actually pretty poor against the run. Paul Warlow, who's, his thing was supposed to be that he was good against the run. And last year he racked up a ton of tackles, kind of like Chad Greenway, or maybe more appropriately Aaron Henderson from 2 years ago, because he played sort of the same role and same position, where running backs would be funneled to him, so you get an artificially high tackle total. So a lot of people thought he was pretty good in run defense, but he's actually not doing a great job at that. He's getting blown up when he's meeting either guards or fullbacks. Justin Durant he's having a lot of problems. He's not who he used to be. And then the rest of the the rest of the linebacker core, it's going to be difficult to figure out who's playing, and they haven't been able to, really, hone it in or nail down the run defense at the second level. So the Vikings are going to have to ask Adrian Peterson to be a little bit patient, given some of the strengths that they have along the defensive line in terms of run stopping. But once a hole opens up and Adrian is able to get through it, he should be able to make some hay against those linebackers. And I think, given how Adrian played, before Green Bay in those previous 3 games, if he finds that patience again, I think that he'll be able to do it. And given that Falcons fans seem pretty pessimistic about the prospect of stopping Adrian Peterson, I think there's some good signs there that the Vikings should be able to run on the Falcons, especially because they may be able to establish an early lead, which we'll talk a little bit more when we talk about the Falcons offense versus the Vikings defense. But yeah, I think that the run game may be sort of the best approach to the Falcons because I have a lot of respect for their top two corners. And I say top two in terms of snap count, but also in terms of their ability. Desmond Trufant and Robert Alford. Alford's been taking a lot of slot snaps, so it's kind of hard to think of him as a top two corner. But he really is, and he's been taking as many snaps as he can with the team. The other corner, Ricardo Allen, is not as good, but I don't know. People have been calling Desmond Trufant Baby Revis, not because he's as good as Revis, but because of his playing style. But he is kind of almost living up to that name because of how well he's been playing this year. I don't know. He is pretty phenomenal, and he's fit for a lot of systems, which we saw when the Falcons switched from the system that they had previously, which was a hybrid 4-3-3-4 with cover one tendencies to the proto Seahawksian cover 1 system that they have now. He's a very good fit for that, just because of the way his instincts have been helping him out.
So something we saw against St. Louis a few weeks ago that I think pleasantly surprised all of us was Teddy's surprisingly developed hard count game. Now, Atlanta's defense has been, well, not so good against penalties this year. Do you believe that the Vikings will be employing a similar strategy against Atlanta and to try and boost up the run game with penalties here and there? Defensive penalties.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit harder to do because they'll be, at Atlanta, they'll be playing an away game. And so
are they still pumping in fake crowd noise? Did we ever get a ruling on whether or not that was illegal?
No, that is in fact illegal.
Oh, right. That's why the thing happened. Yes. Yes.
Well, it is a little much for Vikings fans to be completely smug about pumping in crowd noise because there have been some allegations about the Vikings in the past, whatever. But it is important to note that because it is an away game, it is going to be more difficult. Just because there's going to be maybe some manner of crowd noise, going into Atlanta, and then you also kind of want to break it down by the kind of penalty that they have. Their most often defensive penalty is defensive pass interference, which is not obviously related to the hard count. Defensive offsides, they've had 3 of those this year. And encroachment, which is basically the same thing, a neutral zone infraction, which is very similar. They've had 2 of each of those. So they've had about 7, so that's about 1 a game. They're going to try to induce a couple more. It's going to be more difficult when they're away from home. But they're probably going to want to take advantage of some of those safeties and some of those and some of the other corners, particularly Ricardo Allen, who's been really bad about penalties, and even Robert Alford and Desmond Trufant have some penalty issues this year too, in terms of trying to get defensive holding and defensive pass interference. So that's going to be less about the hard count, although I'm sure they'll try to start that again, and more about making sure that they can induce holding or induce defensive pass interference, because that's going to help the Vikings with some free unrecorded yards too.
So let's look at the downfield situation. How dominant is Stephon Diggs going to be this week?
No, that's a good question. I think it's going to be related to the scheme that the Falcons run. Like I said, it's a cover 3 scheme, and it's very, very similar to Seattle's, which makes a lot of sense. They brought in Dan Quinn from Seattle, and they run basically the same system. So it's a 4-3 with some hybrid responsibilities for their Sam linebacker that'll occasionally turn it into a 3-4. They'll have a hybrid set of 2-gap, 1-gap fronts to make sure that they're solid against the run, which is one of the reasons actually that they've been pretty decent against the run. And then they'll have a safety in the middle of the field who should be very athletic because they've got a lot of responsibility, more than most cover 1 or cover 3 safeties, to patrol deep downfield, while they'll also have Ricardo Allen, Desmond Trufant, or Robert Alford and Desmond Trufant patrol deep zones, down the field. Of course, against, deep receivers. So let's say Mike Wallace on most of his routes or Stephon Diggs on a couple of his routes. They'll play man coverage against him until they have the ability to pass him off. Or, on comeback routes, they'll be playing sort of zone coverage. They have to have their eyes at the quarterback. But it's going to be difficult for Stephon Diggs to get open unless they design some routes to attack the seams. I think Jarius Wright might have a good game just because of the way that they structure their defense. I think that Wright knows how to sit into some defensive holes in zones, and he'll do well. But Stephon Diggs is going to have some trouble getting open against Desmond Trufant. They don't track Trufant across the field as much, and that's just a product of the system. It's like Seattle didn't do that until this year either. And so the Vikings will be able to choose who Desmond Trufant lines up against and who Stephon Diggs lines up against. I would like to see some post routes and some routes attacking the safety because I don't think their safety is very good. I think that William Moore, he's had a lot of trouble this year. His average athleticism is kind of showing up. I think that. Sometimes they'll have Jalen Collins play safety, or no, they won't have him play safety. They'll have him play cornerback, and he, despite his quickness and speed, is pretty easy to exploit. So when they play quarters coverage, he'll be easy to attack. I think that Phillip Adams at safety is having some issues, and he's had a couple of defensive pass interference. So I think that attacking that middle safety might be the best option. It allows you to get away from Desmond Trufant. It allows you to attack maybe the weakest part of their defense, and it allows you to maybe adjust routes to skinny posts to attack seams if you want, and stuff like that. So I think Stephon Diggs will do okay. I don't think this is going to be a 100-plus yard game for him, but I wouldn't be surprised to see, some pretty good deep shots and some times when he's, pretty open because he's a very talented receiver.
Well, and just to be clear, we're talking about primarily Diggs and Wright getting opportunities to attack the safety because Mike Wallace simply can't be counted on.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Mike Wallace will, be able to get open, kind of in the sense that Troy Williamson was always open. Will be able to get open against a lot of these guys because of his speed.
Open by choice / by design, though?
Well, maybe not because it's a very simple defensive scheme, which means it's got, very general rules that you can't really freelance out of. So they probably won't just let him open in order to induce a target. But I think that he'll find ways to get open, but whether or not those are useful targets, is another question. I've been talking about this, a little bit. I talked about this, on the Falcons podcast. I talked about this on 1500. I talked about this on another radio show. But Mike Wallace, he's been getting worse as the season has gone on. And it seems like a focus issue to me. And I mentioned this briefly in the previous podcast, but I kind of want to expand on it. He was actually running some pretty crisp routes, and he's running some pretty smart routes at the beginning of the year.
# heartbreaking drops.
Right. And those drops have shown up a little bit more, but more importantly, and I think that this is why I think it's a focus issue, he was catching the ball early in the season. He's not doing it now. But he's also rounding off routes. He's also running some of the wrong routes at times. He's running routes at the wrong depth at times.
You said he was running crisp routes. Like, which is it?
Well, at the beginning of the season, he's running crisp routes. Now he's not. That's my point, right?
Okay.
That over the course of the season, his routes have been deteriorating, which is why I think it's a focus issue. That I think that at the beginning of the season, he was dialed in. He was catching the ball. He was running crisp routes. He was running the right route. But as the season has gone on, he is more and more likely to round off his routes, and he's rounding them off to a bigger degree. He's less likely to catch the ball, and he's less likely to run even the correct route or the correct depth. And that means, and that to me is an indication that his focus has been decreasing as the season has gone on, and that makes him more and more of a liability as time goes on. And so it'll be difficult to rely on him against a defense that I think is schematically pretty sound, but has some pretty good players. And there's always going to be an answer to wherever he's supposed to be on the field because, Trufant and Alford, while they're not as fast as him, will find ways to keep up with him. And we might even see a lot of off coverage, and it would be nice to see him run crossers, which he's still good at, which is still valuable at doing, run crossers and slants, because I think that this kind of defense can be weak to that with how weak those linebackers are in coverage, because normally the cover three defense in Seattle, you're running into Bobby Wagner or KJ Wright or Cam Chancellor. Here, you're running into, Paul Warlow or Justin Durant or William Moore. And that's a much easier prospect for your tight ends and your receivers. So yeah, Mike Wallace is not trustworthy in a lot of senses. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a deep catch or anything like that, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see him, not show up much on the stat sheet either. And so, yeah, I would rather talk about Jarius Wright or Stephon Diggs because I think that the more consistent and reliable options. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Jarius Wright, threading some holes and getting through some seams and making a bunch of big plays because this is the kind of defense that I think that he can do from the slot, a very good job.
Okay, two questions for you. Who gets more targets, Mike Wallace or Kyle Rudolph?
No, Kyle Rudolph, actually.
All right.
No,
Who gets more targets, Jarius Wright or Kyle Rudolph?
Kyle Rudolph. The reason I keep saying Kyle Rudolph is actually because I think that he's going to have another pretty good game. Not because I think that the previous game is an indication that he's broken open and that we suddenly know how to use him, and now he's going to get 80 yards a game or anything like that.
Oh no,
But
just easily exploitable matchup.
exactly, the Falcons are maybe the worst team in the league against tight ends, and I haven't checked, Football Outsiders DVOA or fantasy points against, but I do know, and this is a problem the Packers, had too, in that they had weak tight end matchups, is that the Falcons have very often gone up against a backup tight end and have allowed them pretty good yards. I mean, it was Ben Watson's, big game, was against the Falcons. I think Kobe Fleener had a career game against the Falcons. A bunch of really bad tight ends, and sometimes they're the backup tight end because of injury or because of demotion, and so it doesn't really show up in Football Outsiders DVOA. But a lot of times, a lot of tight ends who are traditionally, not very good have had some really, really great games against the Falcons. And I think that, Kyle Rudolph is better than a lot of those tight ends. As much as we've been bagging him, I mean, he still has a base level of talent that exceeds, I think, backup tight ends. I mean, it's not a compliment, but I'm not trying to insult him either. And I think that, he could break out. I think that he's fundamentally a better tight end than Ben Watson. And Watson's been on a tear ever since that game, but mostly that game was huge for him. So, if you want to invest in him in DFS or whatever, I would not be upset with going Kyle Rudolph because it's not necessarily that you're chasing last week's points, but this is a really good matchup. So, I would say that. I would say that Kyle Rudolph should be, one of the primary threats. I think it's going to go Stephon Diggs, then Kyle Rudolph in terms of targets, then probably Jarius Wright, and then maybe Mike Wallace. Yeah.
On a scale of cranberry sauce sweet to roasted turkey dry, how bad is Matt Khalil going to screw us over?
Not too badly. He'll be up against Vic Beasley, and aside from this most recent game, obviously, he's actually been not too bad. Yeah, and generally speaking, he's got some good matchups, and I think that he'll just bounce back in general. Somebody mentioned that he might have had a foot issue in the Green Bay Packers game. We'll see if he shows up on the injury reports, but I expect that'll be resolved by the time the game starts. So. Maybe not cranberry sauce, but pumpkin pie?
Ugh. Worse than
Okay,
turkey.
Jesus. Pecan pie. Do you like pecan pie?
Yes.
Okay, pecan pie.
Ooh, that's man. I would say that's better than cranberry sauce, but
Well, but I mean, it's just we're ranking
this is
from
my fault
spicy
for
to.
introducing a broken system. Not as bad as the Packers game, I guess, is what I'm drawing from what you're saying.
Right. Well, I was more just trying to go from a rank from sweetness to spiciness. I didn't want to go the most sweet, so I went, pretty close, but not quite as sweet.
I was aiming for delicious to not delicious.
Oh, then not great mashed potatoes, but pretty good mashed potatoes.
Mashed potatoes with maybe not enough salt, not enough butter.
Yeah. Undersalted mashed potatoes, which are still good and fixable, but not amazing.
Hey, as long as it's not your aunt's first attempt at making wasabi mashed potatoes, where she doesn't bloom the wasabi first, that's fine. I can live with that.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's a pretty good analogy. For basically any Indian food too, when you don't bloom the spices in oil, it just comes out a little bit flatter. So yeah, that's Matt Khalil in my prediction for the game.
Matt Unbloomed Spice Khalil. Now that we have gotten to the, I guess, food analogy portion of the offense, is it fair that we should move on to the defense? I don't know. Is there anything to say about Teddy other than that he's killing it despite everything? I mean, I just feel like it's hard to bag on any part of his game, and he's just been so flexible. I mean, we mentioned the possibility of like hard count stuff, but other than that, he's probably just going to keep on being Teddy, and that's going to be that, right?
Yeah, and there are obviously situations where Teddy could have been better. It's not like he's playing a perfect game. He's being let down by the cast around him or anything like that. But I think that in this specific game, he's going to be in a situation where because he's going to have more time because Atlanta's neutered pass rush, and because the receivers maybe they don't match up well, but schematically the Vikings kind of know what to do. I think that he's in a situation where, despite the fact that the Vikings will want to again rely on the run game and that they'll have ample opportunity to do so, I think that Teddy is going to statistically, have a much better day. He'll be pressured less, and I think he'll find more receiving options. And because they're going to be playing a lot more off coverage because of the threats of Stephon Diggs and Mike Wallace, I would hope, and I don't know if this is going to happen, but I would hope and expect a couple more of those short passing options, especially crossers over the middle to match up against those weak linebackers. And that's going to help him out in terms of, the box score as well. So hopefully this is going to be a situation where Teddy is going to be able to put up a statistically very solid game and, paper over some of the criticisms, at least for a short period of time. But yeah, I don't think that there's much to say in terms of Teddy. I just like to think that this is kind of an ideal kind of situation for him because I think that the ways that that he's been looking bad or the ways that things have kind of been falling around him are not really red flagged for this specific game. So yeah, I think that Teddy statistically is going to have an all right game. I mentioned Kyle Rudolph. I would not be upset from a DFS perspective to have Teddy in a couple of lineups from a low exposure perspective because I just think that this is kind of a good situation for him and he's going to be cheap in a lot of leagues.
It's true, and he, like you said, he will have a high-ish upside.
Yeah.
So let's talk about our defense. Is Linval
Yeah.
Joseph going to have 20 tackles or 30?
Yeah, so they're going to be lining up against an offensive line that is massively improved and still not great. And as of recently, and they've been doing a little bit worse recently. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Mike Person is A, still in the league, and B, starting at center for the Atlanta Falcons. And I think that that's kind of where the biggest weakness in the offensive line is.
Pro
And
Football Focus would bear that out. He is the only overall lineman on the Falcons with a negative rating.
I'm kind of surprised that Andy Levitra is not negative for them too. He probably should be, but and Chris Chester hasn't been great for them either. Now that I think about it, but I would say that the biggest weakness is going to be Mike Person, and Andy Levitra at guard is going to be a big problem for them too. They tend to line up, strong side on the left, which means that Linval Joseph is going to be able to line up against. Or strong side on the right, which means that Linval Joseph is going to be able to line up against Andy Levitra and Mike Person
And
more
he
often than the
actually
other way
blocked
around.
both of them, right?
Yeah, and he'll be able to do a great job, I think, against both of them. I think that he'll get a lot of pressure against them. I think he's going to force Levitra into a lot of penalties. He's had a lot of false starts this year. He's had a lot of holding penalties this year, and the same is true of almost the entire offensive line, except for interestingly enough, Mike Person, who is just bad, but at least he doesn't cause penalties. So yeah, I think that Linval Joseph is going to have another spectacular game, and I think that the fact that Mike Person and Andy Levitra are the people that he's going to line up against, and at times Chris Chester, I think that he's going to do a great job, and I think that he's going to be pretty dominant in terms of run defense, and I think that he's going to show up in terms of the pass rush. So I think that he'll be maybe the feature player for the defense again, because he just has one of the tastiest matchups that you could possibly have, really, for the game.
What about downfield? I mean, they got Roddy White, they got Leonard Hankerson. Is anyone good play wide receiver for the Falcons?
They got a guy, I think, Jones, pretty generic name. Jones. Julio Jones.
Oh, that
Uh,
guy. Oh, him? Oh, really? He plays for the Falcons?
yeah.
What?
He's going to be difficult to deal with, and I wouldn't be surprised if they moved. It's not Desmond. They wouldn't be surprised if they moved Xavier Rhodes around the field to deal with him because Roddy White, he's definitely over the hill. Last year was kind of the last year that he was ever going to be kind of good. He's been he has more snaps than Leonard Hankerson, but I think part of that has to do with injury, if I remember correctly, because I think Leonard Hankerson is higher up than him on the depth chart, and he's certainly higher up on the totem pole in terms of receiving targets from Matt Ryan. And when Leonard Hankerson's your number two, the dude is a very good number three, but I think that as a number two, he's kind of iffy. And so I think that the Vikings will be okay in terms of dealing with Roddy White or Leonard Hankerson in the slot, and in Terrence Newman dealing with sort of the other player. So I think that the passing game, you're going to have to do a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings moved a little bit away from how they normally do coverage and sit Harrison Smith on top of wherever Julio Jones is, and make sure that they've got a good generic defense against sort of a downfield passing attack centered around Julio Jones. And I would like it if that gave also them the freedom to make sure that Xavier Rhodes had the ability to press up against Julio, because even though Julio is good against press coverage, he's much, much better against off coverage, and Xavier Rhodes is much, much more uncomfortable in off coverage than he is in press coverage. So I think that the combination of those two things means that Xavier Rhodes should be in press coverage against him, which also means that you kind of want that safety up top to help bracket and deal with any potential mistakes. So that, I think, is going to be the primary matchup of the entire game, Xavier Rhodes and Julio Jones. And I think that if he does a halfway decent job against Julio Jones, and who knows what that means, maybe it only means 70 yards for the guy, only 70. I think that the Vikings are going to be well positioned to win. I think most of the passing game is going to be accomplished through pressure. Matt Ryan, he's a pretty good quarterback, and he's been a pretty good quarterback this year, despite sort of the Falcons, kind of collapsed late in the season. But his profile in terms of the way that he deals with pressure has kind of changed. He's actually done a pretty good job against pressure this year, but against interior pressure, he's had a lot of problems. And I think the Vikings are going to be, well positioned to make sure that Julio Jones doesn't do a lot, and that Matt Ryan can't go to his outlets. If they have the ability to put some pressure on him, especially up the middle, and sometimes that'll mean, like we already talked about, Linval Joseph. Sometimes that'll mean Sharif Floyd is going to have some pretty good matchups too. Because if he's not against Andy Levitre, he'll be up against Chris Chester, and he'll be able to use his speed a little bit. But it's going to require that the two of them kind of feature in terms of pressure to make sure that Matt Ryan's a little bit more uncomfortable. He did a very good job dealing with interior pressure early in his career. For some reason now he's not doing as good of a job with that. And I think that the Vikings, the way that they're built, the way that they want the pass rush to go, they prefer interior pressure to edge pressure, and they have their defensive ends play a lot more contained. And I think that the Vikings, normally the way the front four go, that's going to be good, but I also expect to see, a lot more blitzing. Matt Ryan has been pretty decent against the blitz this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings, wanted to test the A gap against Mike Person the same way I kind of wanted them to do when I was talking about the Vikings game plan against the Packers in the last episode, and put the center in an A gap conflict where they'll either have a double A gap look from the linebackers like Eric Hendricks and Anthony Barr, and make sure that they rush the linebacker that the center's turning away from, or even just have a linebacker constantly in the A gap with Linval Joseph in the other A gap. And make sure that the center has to make a decision. Even if you don't always blitz that guy, you make sure that there's a lot of confusion for a person who's not very good at making those kinds of decisions and putting a lot of pressure on Matt Ryan. So I think the key to stopping Julio Jones, some of it's going to have to be, really good play from Xavier Rhodes, who should be allowed to play a physical game. Some of it's going to have to do with Harrison Smith or, heaven forbid, Andrew Sendejo. But I think a lot of it's going to have to be pressure up front, and especially up the middle.
Well, and realistically, you mentioned Sendejo just now. Like, the downfield defense is going to have to be reliant on Smith in the middle of the field being kind of the guy on the second guy or on Julio Jones. Like it's gonna be Rhodes and Smith on Julio Jones and another guy, and Andrew Sendejo someplace else, right?
That would be the
So
hope. I wouldn't be surprised if the Falcons,
how do
their
you think
response to
they do with
that.
that?
I think they're going to put Julio in a lot of motion. I think they're going to play him more as a flanker than a split end, so they'll be able to put him in motion.
But that
And
plays right into Harrison Smith's strengths, right? As a strong safety that can be played in the middle of the field.
it can, but I think that what'll happen is the Vikings will have, on passing downs. I think they're going to play a cover two shell, and so they're not going to have Harrison Smith move with Julio Jones if he motions across the field. They might have Xavier Rhodes follow, but they might be able to have Julio Jones against cover two shells. Julio Jones choose which safety he's lining up against.
So we're
So
looking at possibly an analogous situation to the way the Falcons are likely to play us, like cover two that collapses into man at a certain point in the play or a certain point across the field.
yeah, I think so. Except the Vikings will have, I think, a little bit more latitude in terms of choosing their cornerback matchup. Whereas I think the Falcons won't have that kind of latitude because they're going to have Xavier Rhodes simply shadow Julio Jones. At least that's my estimation. When they have a press conference Wednesday morning, maybe after after all of this recording, maybe they change their minds. But I strongly anticipate that Xavier Rhodes is going to shadow, which means that I think the Vikings are a little bit better positioned to deal with that kind of better positioned in terms of the way that they're going to be playing which quarterback, which receiver, than I think the other way around because we get to choose which cornerback lines up against which receiver, but the way the Falcons are deciding to play, on the other end of the field, we will also be able to choose which receiver lines up against which cornerback. So there is a little bit of a difference, but in either case, you'll be able to figure out which safety you want to play.
Kind of works in our favor either way.
Mm-hmm.
So what about this Devontae Freeman guy? I hear he's pretty good.
He's been having not just a pretty good year, but I think he's been having from a film perspective also a good year too, not just statistically or from a fantasy perspective. But I think that on film he shows up and he's patient. They're playing his kind of game. They didn't play his kind of game last year. He has the ability to make one cut and go. I think the way that they run, their zone scheme under Kyle Shanahan makes it pretty simple for him, and it's a system that he's comfortable, familiar, and excellent in. And so they're going to have to rely on making sure that the linebackers don't over pursue. We've already talked about Sharif and Linval, and I think that they'll be disciplined against zone running teams because they've had a lot of opportunity to go up against zone running teams this year, and for the most part, those two have remained very disciplined and very solid and stout against the run. Everson Griffin, he's normally good against the run, and I thought he was good against the run last week. PFF disagreed, but I think that in this situation, he'll be good against the run once more because I think that the way that he's been playing throughout his entire career, he's been very, very disciplined and solid and foundational in terms of the way that he makes his reads. So, I think that it's going to come down to a little bit Brian Robinson, who, like Corey Bierman, like Rob Ninkovich, is athletic and solid against the run, but mostly making sure that the linebackers and their fullback, Patrick DeMarco, he's really, really good, and he might blow up Eric Hendricks a couple of times. We'll see. But making sure the linebackers don't over pursue and stay disciplined within their gaps and know when to be aggressive and know when to be patient so that they can, continue to bottle up Devonta Freeman. I anticipate that Freeman is not going to have a phenomenal game, but that's a very difficult ask for someone who's been having a pretty astounding year. He's been not having as good of a game recently in the past couple of games, but the Falcons have also been trailing a little bit more often, so they've had to go away from him. One of the reasons I suspect that the Vikings will be able to play with the lead is because I think that they'll be able to play the run well enough, and they'll be able to put pressure on the passer well enough early on that they'll be able to take on that early lead, whether by field goal or by touchdown, and be able to run up the game. And I think that part of that is going to be contingent upon not necessarily shutting down Julio Jones, but shutting down Devonta Freeman and making Matt Ryan's life really, really difficult. I think that's going to be the route by which they do that. And yeah, I mean, it's zone running. They've seen it forever. Kyle Shanahan is phenomenal at coaching it. At this point, he's better than his dad at it. And it's going to take a lot to make sure that they can, deal with Patrick DeMarco and deal with Devonta Freeman and deal with, sort of the zone blocking that they've been engaging in for a while.
So what we're functionally looking at is Linval Joseph basically like blocking two guys all game, and Everson Griffin coming in for 5 or 6 tackles and a sack or two.
Yeah, I think so. I think that in a situation where Linval Joseph only gathers 1 or 2 tackles, but occupies 2 blockers very consistently, and Everson Griffin ends up with about 6 tackles plus a sack. I think that is probably a good leading indicator that the Vikings are doing a very good job against the run. Not really contingent upon the number of tackles Linval Joseph will get, although maybe because of his matchup he'll get a lot, but dependent almost entirely on the contain play and the edge play of defensive ends like Brian Robinson and Everson Griffin. If you get 6 tackles and a sack, I think that'll be a very good game for him and a very good indicator for the run defense.
Ideal world, 2 or 3 sacks against Ryan and a forced fumble against Freeman, and lots of non-statistically important but very exciting and game-winning play from Linval Joseph, Brian Robeson, and we haven't mentioned anything about Anthony Barr. I imagine that given the Vikings' proclivity for interior run blocking and pass rushing rather than edge rushing, he will have a relatively quiet stat line.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on how they want to use him. If they want to use him as an interior blitzer from off the ball a lot, and not necessarily, a nickel rusher from the edge, I wouldn't be surprised to see him, show up statistically in terms of his ability to put pressure on the quarterback. But I suspect he'll be very important in terms of being able to stop screens, because I think the Vikings would go back into their traditional pressure packages, and those traditional pressure packages, the normal response by most offensive coordinators, not just this year, but football theory, like when people write football papers like they do for coaching clinics and stuff, the traditional response to inside pressure and blitz pressure that the Vikings put together is to create screens. One of the many reasons the Vikings are very good against screens was because of the athleticism of Anthony Barr and players like Eric Kendricks, and I think Barr is going to be very critical to making sure that when the Vikings put together some of these exotic pressure looks, that they do have the ability to shut down those screens. So he's going to be very good at patrolling, edge to edge. I think he's going to be pretty critical in the run game too, because I think he's going to be the guy, maybe less Eric Kendricks and Chad Greenway when he's on the field. He's going to be the guy that's going to have to make a lot of these tackles. He's going to be the guy that's going to be freed up by the fact that Linval Joseph is taking on 2 blockers. So I think that he'll actually play a very, very important role for the Vikings, not just necessarily in terms of his ability to blitz or come off the edge or come up the middle, but his ability to stop the run.
So Vegas Insider has the game with a 46-point spread with Atlanta a 2-point favorite. That would be 24-22 Atlanta. What is your score prediction?
Yeah, I don't see that. I don't see Atlanta being the favorite. I'm very confident that the Vikings should win this one. I would say, we can be a little bit optimistic too in terms of the Vikings offense, and I would go 24-17 or something along those lines. Yeah, 24-17. Touchdown favorites Vikings for me, and I think they score 3 touchdowns and a field goal. And kick all the extra points. Damn it.
Whoa. Slow it down.
With the first game that in a while where I don't predict a missed kick from Blair Walsh, and of course misses a kick.
Blair gonna Walsh.
All right, what about you?
Frankly, with these two teams, they are both capable of scoring a lot of points. Well, maybe not Minnesota is capable of scoring a lot of points, but I believe they are capable of scoring more points than the spread suggests. Man. Atlanta trying to come off a 3-game losing streak at home. I think they're going to want it. I think the game will be closer than you think. I would say Minnesota still wins. probably 24-21.
Yeah, I mean that's fine. That makes sense to me. 3-point win. That's close-ish to the over/under anyway. But it does give the Vikings a bit of an advantage, and it gives the whole game a few more points in general. So yeah, that makes
Actually,
sense to me.
I'm going to revise my prediction downward. I'm going to say 24-17. I don't think Atlanta's offense can, even
You
with
can't
Julio.
you can't choose that, man. I already chose that. You got to choose a different one. 24-17 was my prediction.
Fine, 24-21.
All right, hater.
No, how am I a hater? I wanted to pick the thing you picked.
Yeah, but then you picked in the direction where the Falcons do even better. Hater.
I, all
But you're saying
right.
the Vikings can't stop the Falcons? Jesus. Where's your pride?
I left it on the field last week. Even after Linval Joseph got that, look, I know that the stupid recap show happened without me, and I am reserving most of my thoughts about that nonsense game.
Nonsense game.
But I will say that Aaron Rodgers went up to Linval Joseph after that garbage roughing the passer penalty and like patted him on the back. Like, it's okay, man.
Well, what's that supposed to indicate to me?
That it was a garbage penalty. It was obviously a garbage penalty. They both went in with forearms up, and poor Aaron Rodgers fell over backwards like a little bit. And Linval Joseph drew possibly the most significant penalty of the game, other than a penalty that Matt Khalil drew. I don't remember which one because there were so many.
Mm.
But
There were a lot of significant penalties too, but I agree with you that it was a bullshit call. I'm not going to say Aaron Rodgers patting
Aaron
Linval.
Rodgers agrees with us.
I don't think that's an indication that Aaron Rodgers agrees. I think that's a pretty poor indicator, honestly.
Wow.
But I agree that the penalty in general, yes, I agree that the penalty was awful. I disagree that Aaron Rodgers patting Linval Joseph on the back is an indication that he agrees.
All right. I thought it was garbage. It looked like Aaron Rodgers even thought it was garbage. Like, hey man, Brady rule. What you gonna do?
It could have been like a Michael Jordan shrug too, right? Where he
No,
agrees with it. Well,
no,
no.
it was not that because Aaron Rodgers is a lot of things, but he is not the like desperate egomaniac that managed to get away with gambling on his own sport like Michael Jordan did.
The Michael Jordan shrug probably has very little to do with a lot of other Michael Jordan, character foibles.
No,
But
no.
what?
Everything Michael Jordan did on that court was calculated to put his opponents
God.
on tilt.
Yes, but that has nothing to do with his gambling problems. Jesus Christ, man.
No, but he needed his opponents to be on tilt so that he could win his bets.
And his games. He also liked to win basketball games, man.
I mean, yes, that's why he illegally bet on them.
Well, look, I'm sorry I made a comparison to a gesture that Michael Jordan. I didn't even compare the two's personalities. Although I will say Aaron Rodgers
Well, but
is
that's all I'm saying is that the comparison breaks down as soon as you look at anything past the gesture. Because
I'm only looking at the gesture.
then you are wearing blinders, my friend.
Man, Conspiracy Hat Dusty came on real quick. Damn.
No, it's not a conspiracy. It's just that Michael Jordan is a bad person and Aaron Rodgers probably isn't.
Well, okay. I will agree with both of those statements as much as it sucks to agree with the second statement. But I'm just saying.
He's not a bad person. He's really annoying to live with, but he's not a bad person. I mean,
You're even interrupting me when you agree with me. I'm just saying your proclivity to make connections at a very fast rate is a shared one for your proclivity for conspiracy theories and your intrusion of your Michael Jordan psychoanalysis onto one shrug that I casually mentioned for Aaron Rodgers, which is just to say, Michael Jordan's shrug was just to say, hey, I'm having a really great game. What are you going to do about it? Aaron Rodgers is basically just like, Yeah, that's the rules. What are you gonna do about it? Like I thought that was maybe a better example of yeah, this is what happens. Welp.
Jet fuel can't melt, Michael Jordan Schmug.
Yes, Dusty.
That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Moving on.
Shall, shall we mailbag?
Let's
We got
let's mailbag. Let's talk about fun things again.
holiday themed mailbag. It is America's greatest holiday, Thanksgiving. I had a in my working life, I'm a bartender and I have a regular guest who is from out of the country. He is originally from a part of the world where they don't celebrate Thanksgiving, which is, very detailed because literally nowhere but America celebrates Thanksgiving. And so he found this holiday to be very curious. He's like, why is everything closed? Like, what is the etymology of this holiday? And I tried to explain it, and the explanation just, got to be more and more ludicrous. And I was just like, man, just go with it.
Isn't that how it is with most? Like, can you really explain Halloween to like a non-Western audience? Like, all holidays basically are well, just go with it. Like, why do we celebrate Christmas? I mean, it's likely that Jesus wasn't born on December 26th, and a lot of these rituals don't come from then; they come from adopted pagan rituals at the same time. Just go with it, man.
No, but the whole world, for better or worse, celebrates Christmas.
Yeah, because it's a cultural holiday.
But and that was the way I tried to frame Thanksgiving to him.
You,
I was like, it's a cultural holiday. He was like Christmas? And I was like, no, actually not like that at all.
well, yeah, but I mean, also, still, yes, a little bit.
So you see my difficulty.
You could just say all holidays are like this. Did you not at least try to explain that to him? That all holidays are, well, maybe just go with it.
Some holidays are like that.
There are literally zero holidays where the explanation is like, it mandatorily makes sense.
There are localized holidays and there are like global holidays. Christmas, global holiday. Thanksgiving, American holiday.
And to some extent, Canadian. But yes.
So what are you doing for Thanksgiving?
My parents don't live in Minnesota, and my girlfriend kind of just wants to get away from her parents for a while. So we are going to a Friendsgiving with a friend of ours, and presumably many of his friends. Hopefully, otherwise it's going to be kind of weird if it's only 3 people. But no judging. Our Friendsgiving is going to have a theme, which I normally hate most themed meals, most themed holidays that are not the holiday itself. But the theme makes a lot of sense. So he is Native American, and he naturally takes a lot of exception to the nature of Thanksgiving, but he doesn't want to celebrate.
What?
Yeah, right. But he doesn't want to not.
This may be the greatest Friendsgiving of all time. You are actually recreating the first Thanksgiving.
Kind of, yeah. So our approach to this is
Do not bring blankets.
well, no. Remember, I'm not white, Dusty. I don't know if you remember that. So it would not be my role in this Thanksgiving role play to bring blankets.
Hey man, you're less native than he is.
Significantly less native.
All the way less native.
But if you'd let me friggin' finish this, our approach to this is to make foods that are native to the Americas. Obviously, like your spices and stuff don't have to be, although he is going to do that, which is going to be fun. But like our food or meats, for example, we're not going to bring pig, which is going to be a huge problem for us because I don't eat turkey on Thanksgiving, not as like a religious observance, but because turkey is a trash meat. We'll talk about that more in the mailbag.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
Yeah. But I won't be able to bring ham, so I'm going to have to figure out another meat. And by figure out, I mean we've kind of got a plan. And it's going to be like mashed potatoes, and obviously there's going to be so yams, I guess, are not native. Sweet potatoes are, which is a nice, interesting digression. But yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of research tomorrow in terms of like what fits the theme, what does not fit the theme. And I don't know. I kind of like these constraints because they force us to be creative. And there's going to be some really good so we could do, for example, dishes that are culturally not native but use ingredients that are native. So we could make like a wild rice risotto, for example, and that sounds delicious. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of that.
I have the perfect recipe for you.
I am delighted to hear it. We could either do it on the podcast or not. Let's do it on the podcast.
There will be a link in the show notes. Marcus Samuelson's
Oh, I love Marcus Samuelson. Okay.
bourbon maple glazed sweet potatoes.
Ooh, that sounds delicious. And
Nothing more American than sweet potatoes. Nothing more North American than maple syrup. Nothing, truly nothing more American than bourbon. In fact, there are like rules about what you can and cannot call bourbon depending on where it comes from in America.
that's in America. Yeah, no, absolutely. I look forward to looking up this recipe and eating it because it sounds delicious. And you know, we need more ways to make sweet potatoes. So that
Maybe not more, but perhaps better.
okay, yeah, sure. I think that those two concepts are not too far apart anyway. But yeah,
I mean, there are plenty of ways to, combine spices and put marshmallows on top and then place them under a broiler. But, that's
but that's what I mean by more, right? Is I well, okay. Fundamentally, from a thesis perspective, I agree with you that better was a better way to describe it. Yes, we need better ways to make
this may be one of my favorite episodes of North Code for all the ways you end up regrettably agreeing with me.
I still didn't agree with you about the Michael Jordan thing. That was just dumb. Your distinctions were without a difference.
That's fair. I'll give you that one.
Regrettably agreeing with the reef, I see.
Well, usually I'm so enthusiastic about it. Like, usually I just take your rightness and build upon it, like we did through the whole analytical portion of the show. But
well, we're approaching the food portion, so it's much more likely that we're on footing that favors you. But yeah, so that's our Thanksgiving. I think your Marcus Samuelson recipe is phenomenal. We'll look it up tonight to make it tomorrow, or to prep it tomorrow and make it for Thursday.
it'll be in the show notes. Everybody can
Yes.
look. Please make this if you can. It looks like it tastes really good.
Yeah, and we're gonna make mashed potatoes in the way that you described in the previous Thanksgiving episode, which was to simmer the garlic and cream for about half an hour. We're also going to throw some roast garlic in the mashed potatoes as well, because that does not add much of a garlicky flavor. It's more of a nutty flavor. It's delicious.
And finding the little garlic nuggets, finding two different kinds of garlic nuggets eventually in the mashed potatoes will be a glorious flavor treat. No, that is a smart choice.
Yep. So we're going to be very happy about all of this.
This year, my significant other and I are eschewing tradition, eschewing community, eschewing Friendsgiving. We spend our whole lives in public-facing jobs as a chef and a bartender, and as a chef, my significant other, battles a lot of requests for friends and family to make dishes for their Thanksgivings. Like on a holiday that is supposed to be like a celebration of community, I just want to put them to work. So instead, we are pretending to be out of town and perfectly cooking a couple of New York strip steaks and maybe searing some broccolini. There may or may not be some garlic wasabi mashed potatoes with simmered garlic and properly bloomed wasabi.
Right.
And maybe a pear tart or something fancy for dessert. But just keeping it real simple. The steaks are already thawing. The vegetable and the dessert don't freaking matter. The most important part of Thanksgiving for us is going to be turning off our phones.
Oh wow, that's not something I can do.
Well, it's not something either of us can ever really do either, but we're doing it.
That's going to be a lot of fun. I assume that you'll also be able to maybe enjoy movies and stuff like that. If it's just going to be the two of you, oh, that sounds really cozy.
We have a grip of alcohol, a handful of bottles of wine. Beyond that, it'll just be a day of relative peace in a life that doesn't have a whole lot of that. And that will be the thing that we are most grateful for. So,
This specific day, this specific time. Screw the rest of you.
exactly.
Yeah, I can get behind
F
that.
y'all. F y'all. We're doing Thanksgiving. We are grateful for this moment. I will tell you though, we have already discovered that we can like store a cast iron skillet in the oven for like an hour and sear steaks on it and
Yes.
fill our apartment with smoke, and the
Delicious,
fire alarms
delicious.
won't go off.
Yeah, well, I am pseudo required to not turn them off, but I think that for periods of time when I do make steak, I do that. So yeah. Oh God, I love that. I love that approach. Superheating the cast iron in the oven to sear a perfectly seasoned, well-oiled steak.
Top rack under the broiler, flip it over. Oh,
Beautiful.
oh. All right, mailbag. Ty the Fly Guy at the Tyler Larson writes us, do you think there's any chance we see Wallace and Teddy develop any signs of chemistry?
Yeah, no, that one's a pretty good question because I think that one of the inhibitors for the offense is just sort of how the connection between the two has been going. But I think that the question is less about, or the issue is less about, quote unquote chemistry, and more about Michael Wallace continuing to move away from the things that he's supposed to do, which would beguile any quarterback. It's not really a question of chemistry so much as kind of, doing your job. He's running routes to the wrong depth. He's rounding off routes now, and he's dropping the ball, and that's like less about chemistry, more about focus. So if Mike Wallace can sort of, I don't know, recenter himself, and I know that sounds like Zen, but I mean it's a human concept. If he can find a way to get discipline and focus again, then yes, the connection between the two of them will increase. But in terms of just the two of them working together at an intuitive level, I don't think that's the issue, and I don't think that will, I don't think that will, materially, develop either. So I think that, yeah, I think that the real question is, whether or not Mike Wallace is going to refocus, and I think that's not going to happen.
Well, and how frustrating must this be for Teddy having to deal with a receiver that started out crisp in the beginning of the year, and now he's trying to target passes, and that's something Teddy can do pretty accurately. And meanwhile, Mike Wallace is rounding off routes, showing up maybe a step early or a step late on a hook. Like,
Yeah,
how do you deal with that if you're Teddy?
it must be frustrating, but Teddy is kind of like the consummate teammate, so it'll be interesting to see, how maybe how he deals with it. But yeah, no, I don't know. It'll be interesting because he's a pretty level-headed guy, and this is probably one of the more frustrating situations that a quarterback will have to deal with. Man, it's gotta suck.
John Judith writes us, so if you hate turkey so much, what do you cook for Thanksgiving? Follow up, this isn't really a question. I'm smoking 2 bone-in turkey breasts, one butter injected with Cajun spice, the other more traditional herbs with butter injected.
Okay, so this is where I get to break down why I hate turkey for Thanksgiving. That it is because it is the least of all meats. It's like the most likely to dry out. It has maybe not the least amount of flavor, but it has a significantly lower amount of flavor than almost every other meat. I think that I think chicken has more flavor than turkey and is less likely to dry out because it's easier to cook a chicken. Of course, if you spatchcock a turkey, it's a little bit easier to cook it. But yeah, I mean,
It's true for a chicken as well, and a
man.
spatchcocked chicken tastes better because it has more fat and connective tissue per like ounce of edible meat.
Exactly. No, that's true. Yeah, I don't know. It's just it sucks. Um, I just feel like you have to do more to turkey to make it taste good, and you have to be more careful with turkey to make it a good experience. And all of the things that you do to make turkey, good are things that you could do to other meats to make good meats better. So turkey's a trash meat. But what I haven't said, I usually have a nice honey glazed ham. Um, but this year it'll be kind of difficult because ham is not native to North America, or I should say pigs are not native to North America. So we're gonna figure it out. We probably can't get our hands on llama meat on short notice, but those are pretty native.
Goose.
Oh,
Goose.
goose is a great idea. We might do that. That's
Goose.
phenomenal. Yeah, we'll probably do duck or geese because wow, they're good.
So this tweet, I'm smoking 2 bone-in turkey breasts with one butter injected and Cajun spice, the other more traditional herbs with butter injected. This is exactly the problem in one tweet with Thanksgiving.
Well,
This is such an overwrought presentation
but I mean
for.
that is going to taste good for a turkey.
Okay, but you could stop halfway. You could do either one of those. Like the one turkey that I have made for Thanksgiving that tasted truly amazing was a smoked turkey.
Yeah, well, I think for a
Just
smoked
a.
turkey, you really have to dry brine it. You really have to just use salt, and then wash it off.
Oh no, I went with a wet brine,
Really,
and yeah,
I just think that wet brines drain more flavor out of the turkey than, and they don't really have a lot of forgiveness when it comes to draining flavor out. So,
what flavor does a turkey have to drain really? And I went with a cool-ish smoke. Like I set the smoker to the lowest possible temperature
hmm
and
that makes
burned through
sense.
probably 3 or 4 more like smoking pucks. We had a fancy Bradley smoker that year than I needed to, but like realistically, you can either smoke your turkey or especially if it's a breast. Like if there's no bones involved, then really all you're doing is imparting the flavor of your choice into the meat. And so you can either smoke it or you can inject it with butter and spices and herbs or whatever. Injecting meat with stuff is like, I mean, I guess, but that strikes me as.
It's well, so marinades don't do a very good job of imparting flavor to the interior of meat. So I don't actually have much of a problem with injection. I think injection's fine. I think it tastes good, but I think you're right. It is representative of the problem that turkey presents, and that you kind of need to do it.
If you need to inject it with something, you need a different meat. And we suggest here at Norse Code either steak or ham.
Correct. I'm not against chicken if you require a poultry. It will feel a little bit less, celebratory.
Well, if you need poultry, duck or goose, keep it legit, keep it real.
Yeah, if you want it to be like an occasion kind of meat, duck. And oh man, duck. Once you know that all you have to do to sear a duck breast is to crosshatch the top with a knife, just score it real quick. Um, Duck is so easy and forgiving. Well, not forgiving, but it's so easy and delicious.
Well, and especially being from Minnesota, you have such a phenomenal cornucopia of game birds available to you. I mean, there's pheasant, there's duck, there's grouse, there's goose. I mean, there are so many better tasting meats that you could prepare, and you don't even have to go the stupid Reddit internet, turducken stuffed into a lamb nonsense. Like
That's actually a very poor way of preparing meat. But
it it is it is meat for the television generation.
what
All
I'm not super opposed to kind of the performancy, gorge ourselves. It's good. It tastes good because it is giant and ridiculous sort of culture. But I think that you just shouldn't mistake one for the other. I think that you do it for the novelty of it, and I think that it's not necessarily a great preparation. Things like turducken. But yeah, I don't know, man. I'm not opposed to the way that you're making this turkey. I think that you're doing a pretty good job of dealing with the inherent problems of turkey. But I'm just saying, you're doing a lot to
if
make.
you gotta cook a turkey breast, that's probably like those turkey breasts are going to be delicious. But at the end of the day, they're going to be turkey breasts. And I mean, frankly, in the upper Midwest, what's more impressive? Turkey breasts injected with things or a pheasant, a grouse, and a goose on your table? Separate from each other. It's very important they're separate from each
Separate
other.
from each other. Yeah, Dusty makes a very good point, which I obviously agree with. So that's all we're saying.
Tommy Gunn writes us with a few questions that we already addressed during the show. Here's one. Are quick-fire offensive schemes like quick slants and pitches the needed step to cover the offensive line issues?
100% yes, especially because a lot of corners are playing the Vikings off because of how often they'll run deep routes. I think that there's multiple ways that the quick 3-step and quick five, not normal 5 steps, but quick five, could work. Even some 1-step drops. I would just like to see more of them, and I agree that that is a great way to paper over some offensive line issues. It's not a panacea or anything like that. It's not going to cover everything, and those quick hits are not going to be able to solve every situation or be useful in every situation. But I think they're being underutilized, especially given how often Teddy's under pressure. So yes.
Tommy Gunn also writes us, why am I not as devastated after this Green Bay loss as I usually am each season? Why do I still have hope?
That's a really good question because I think a lot of Vikings fans are more devastated, and actually for the same reason that you may be less devastated, which is that the Vikings had a great chance to win. Most of the experts favored the Vikings. They had a 53% of experts picked them on Pick Watch. They were a 1-point favorite. And so this is definitely a game where fans felt like the Vikings could win, like for sure.
No, but that leaves aside the biggest and most important narrative of this game, which was that if the Vikings had won, it would have totally busted the narrative for the NFC North and the playoff picture as well. Like, if we win this game, we are functionally in the driver's seat for the NFC North. And suddenly the Packers are playing for the wild card, which they probably get, 2013 Redux. But
No, yeah.
losing this game makes the playoff picture much more complicated for the Vikings.
Yeah, and so I think that's why a lot of people were devastated. But I think that the fact that the Vikings were in that position, that they're still a 7-3 team, that the Packers are functionally, not really because they have the head-to-head, but are functionally tied with the Vikings for the divisional lead. I think all of those reasons are maybe why you're less devastated because. The Vikings are a good team, and normally when the Vikings have lost to the Packers in the past couple of years, it's shit cherry on a shit cake. That like, hey, the Vikings are a bad team, and also you got walloped by the Packers. In this case, yeah, you got beat by the Packers and kind of by a significant amount, but it's a good team fundamentally. So maybe that's why you're not upset.
I believe the turn of phrase is feces cherry on a cake of shit.
Oh, well, my mistake.
Tommy Gunn's final question, turducken basting suggestions?
Oof, we just went over this. So first suggestion, no, don't do it. Second suggestion, it's kind of difficult to meld all the flavors together, so you're not going to be able to get a really good like a baste together. Especially because I think the turkey, it's going to be difficult to find a good baste for it. Normally, if it's like a ham, I would suggest you could just combine some Coke with some melted butter, and that's like a weird baste, but it actually tastes pretty good on ham. For this one, you're going to have to go pretty basic, like paprika and butter, and some other Thanksgiving-y, turkey-y spices. But butter, I think, is the base that you want to go with.
Some combination of the oils of your own self-satisfaction at making a turducken and also butter is the correct answer.
Sorry we trashed the turducken right before we got to your turducken question, but I don't think we're all that sorry.
No, not sorry at all. Turducken is trash. It's an internet thing. Let's just get over it and get back to making real food for our nice dinner. Josh Bjork writes us, is Norv the tortoise of the football coaching world?
That's interesting, mostly because Norv sometimes will occasionally look like a turtle, or a tortoise.
He has a very leathery neck.
He does. He has quite the leathery neck. In terms of his ability to adapt, or rather not adapt and be slow to respond to change, yeah, he's not as innovative as we'd like, as we expected him to be. And it seems like he's slow to react to what's happening, but I don't know if I totally buy the analogy. I just think that sometimes he will occasionally look like a tortoise.
Josh Bjork writes us, why don't we give Patterson some of Wallace's reps? Can't really get less production, can we? Well, I don't know. Why? Like, if all your receivers are going to round off routes or kind of do their own thing, wouldn't you want the one that has proven to have better hands historically?
I don't know. That's a really good question. And I don't just say that after the end of every question. I think that's an interesting one because I think it kind of goes into the known quantity versus unknown quantity debate the known quantity kind of sucks and the unknown quantity likely sucks, why not go with the unknown quantity? Hey, I'm not actually opposed to that. I think that you should reduce Mike Wallace's snaps first for Charles Johnson, which we mentioned on the previous episode, but also, throw in a couple more Patterson snaps if he continues to screw up his routes, if he continues to screw up in ways bigger than Wallace, which I think that he has been doing this season. I think that's the reason he hasn't seen more snaps. Because Wallace is at least an option on a lot of these routes. I think Patterson eliminates himself as an option on a lot of these routes by the way he runs them. But I think that we should see a slight increase in a large increase in Charles Johnson snaps and a slight increase in Patterson snaps.
So the answer is that we could get less production because Patterson runs routes less cleanly, but there is a third option, which is Charles Johnson, and we should be going to him instead of both.
Yes. That
Perfect.
is accurate. Yeah.
Cody Whittington writes us, would it have been legal for us to grab James Jones by his hoodie to make a tackle?
Oh, I didn't realize that that was going to be a question. I kind of talked about that on the last episode. So from the perspective of the kind of force you exert on a player on a tackle, that very much is similar to a horse collar tackle.
Horse collar, yeah.
Right. But from the way it's just kind of dangling out there, it's kind of similar to tackling someone by their hair, which is totally legal. And because of that, I think it's legal. Still haven't looked it up. But I think it's legal to tackle someone by their hoodie, but I don't know, and I'm not going to look it up. I'm just going to speculate because I can. But yeah, no, I think it's probably illegal, even though it maybe should be illegal by the nature, the spirit of the rule behind the horse collar tackle. Especially because I think that you can tackle someone by the jersey in the area of their horse collar so long as you do not grab the pads. Not sure.
That makes more sense to me because I feel like grabbing somebody by their shoulder pad assembly has much more wrenching force on their body and much higher potential for injury than just grabbing them by their jersey from behind or by grabbing them from a hoodie, which, there's no accounting for the hood separating from the hoodie when you do that because it's under the jersey and the pads. But if you grab some dude by the pads from behind, then yeah, you're probably going to end up twisting his whole body because it's one contiguous piece, right?
Well, it's sort of. I mean, the reason it's banned is not because of the torque on the body, but because when you tackle someone from behind while they're running, you have a good chance of actually breaking their legs, which has happened a couple of times in the NFL because of horse collar tackles.
So here's my argument: is that the stitching that connects a hood to a hoodie is probably not strong enough to.
I see what you're getting at. I see.
It would give you would have just ripped the hood off the hoodie long before you were able to do any damage to the body of the person by potentially stopping their forward motion.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fairish. Yeah. I'll buy it.
Yeah, and I would say that the chance of you ripping James Jones's hood off his hoodie is much higher than damaging his jersey or injuring him by actually horse collar tackling him. And honestly, I suspect that that's one of the reasons that's a legal thing to do is because the one person who was charged with determining whether or not you could be hurt by somebody pulling on your hoodie watched a high school football game and was like, no.
Guess not.
You're fine. It's probably fine.
Do we have any other questions?
Nope. That's the mailbag.
Okay. So just have that area of dead space right before I ask.
Well, I just wanted to have a quiet moment for once in a podcast that is usually fraught with verbal tics and people who talk over each other because it's the only way they can get a word in edgewise.
No, Reef, I'm saying I agree with you on Jordan, but let me emphasize it.
No, I insist upon interrupting your agreement so I can tell you what I think. It's just so important.
Now I'm gonna just read a bunch of Michael Jordan stories after this podcast and talk and read about how he made Clyde Drexler cry when they were both on Team USA together.
Oh my God, we're gonna pass links back and forth and gin up some more content for the Christmas episode. There is definitely a year-end clip show in the works for all of you who have been so kind as to enjoy our show this whole time.
Yeah, no, we've got some good stuff. Maybe stuff that might be better than I don't know. I don't know if our listeners found it all that funny. We found it hilarious, the Vince Young Heisman Trophy bit. But this year we may have stuff better than that. Who knows?
I disagree.
I
That
don't know.
was
I thought our bantering with Justice, the ones that we're going to be allowing into the clip show, I think some of that is really high quality.
some of that's pretty well, man. And this okay. So you have a Netflix account, right?
Yes.
Are you an American? Of course you have a Netflix account.
I either have one or have access to one. Duh.
Have you seen with Bob and Dave?
No, I haven't. It's on our list. It's next, but we just got obsessed with How to Get Away with Murder. But your point.
Well, it it goes directly to that thing.
To the Heisman Trophy discussion, or to the idea that Justice had good content.
Well, to the idea that just what started as like a 5 second idiot conversation, just like flowered into hilarious improv comedy.
Yeah, well, that sounds like either really great or really uncomfortable watching. So we'll probably watch it.
Trust me, it is both.
Oh, good! Yay! It's like Adult Swim all over. Is it from people who do Adult Swim stuff?
No, although if you need another Netflix recommendation, uh, the Aziz Ansari show, Master of None.
Oh, that is like the next thing we're going to watch when we're done with How to Get Away with. Yeah, I've heard so many good things about this.
So Eric Wareheim, one of the guys from Tim and Eric Awesome Show, the only show on Adult Swim I have ever like genuinely hated.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
Eric Wareheim plays a normal, funny person.
What? Really?
Astonishing, right? Right?
That that alone seems uncomfortable.
No wigs, no dresses, no babies with beards. It's great.
Oh, that's so unusual. What was
I don't know.
the?
I don't know if it's better than just like burning down its list of movies and actual TV shows. Like its original content is really good, but like, I mean, do I just like does Netflix even do DVD subscriptions anymore? Like, where am I supposed to watch movies? Do I have to steal them?
I have heard tell that you can get DVDs mailed to you, but I do not know anyone who does that.
Exactly. And yet every month, and it's about to happen at the end of this month too. Every good first run movie and TV show drops off on Netflix.
Yeah, no, it's the most obnoxious crap on the planet, for sure. But I will say, and sometimes, so even when they develop new deals with the new networks, like for example, the Food Network, they got a deal to put some Food Network content up. So first, they don't do seasons; they do collections, which are assortments of episodes. If there are reality show competitions which string from episode to episode, you will have them kind of in order, or not kind of actually in order. But for the most part, things like Good Eats, things like Chopped, things that don't string from episode to episode, you'll just get a random assortment of episodes. And sometimes they'll upload one collection and have collection one, then they'll get rid of collection one and put collection two up. And it'll say collection, it'll taunt you, it'll say collection two, and you can't access collection one. So they'll do that too. Um, yeah, yeah. Every year they just get rid of some really, really great hashtag content. Probably because they want to put more and more original content up, but also probably because every television station is finding out that they can charge a small price for people to access it directly through their website,
All right. It's not every television station. It's the three or four like large content holders
Fine, fine.
who are not only fighting a war on the content licensing front, because now that we live in a world where Comcast, NBC, and Universal Films can all be the same company and fight against Netflix, they not only accuse Netflix of stealing their bandwidth, whatever that means, but they try to take away the rights to display the content that they have made on Netflix because they think they can make more money doing it other ways.
Well, correct. That's fundamentally yes. So Netflix is now turning to original content production, which is hit or miss. At any
And
rate,
code is now turning into borderline politics, which is definitely a miss. And so, with that, we will say happy Thanksgiving from all of us here at Norse Code. Thank you so much for listening. You can find Arif on Twitter at ArifHassan NFL. You can find me at Dusty O'Connell on Twitter. James runs the official Norse Code Twitter account at NorseCodeDN. You can find him personally at Big Mono. Our website is NorseCodePodcast.com. Please click the PayPal donate link and give us a couple bucks. Only about $3.50. Or if you really love us and you like candy. Wow, that was way too
that was
creepy.
weird. Do it again.
I'm just going to keep rolling with this take. If you love us and candy, please click on the Patreon link or go to patreon.com/NorseCode. Become a recurring subscriber to Norse Code. We promise you content all throughout the year. I know some Vikings podcasts are already testing the future draft waters, but we already know how this draft game goes. You'll get 2 solid months of draft content from us when it's appropriate. And probably some other stuff too. So, yeah, click on that. Give us money. Check out facebook.com/Daily Norseman. You can follow our Facebook page. DailyNorseman.com, by the way, is the original progenitor of this podcast. And we want to offer a hat tip to them. They have Arif's latest, greatest article on why all of your fears about Teddy Bridgewater are overwrought.
Accurate. Also, it got featured by, which I like. It adds a bit of credibility to it. It got featured by Inside the Pylon. InsideThePylon.com is a fantastic website. It's got a lot of former NFL scouts who write for them, a lot of people who have trained NFL scouts like Dan Hatman, and just a lot of really, really good content, really smart content, really in-depth X's and O's type stuff. They go into college players, they go into NFL players, but they also linked my piece, and they've also indicated that it's a pretty good piece, so sounds like I've had a hit. I'm really happy with that. So if you haven't read it by now, which would be kind of unusual because I think that everybody who listens to this podcast is at least interested in my other work, head over there now. It's my most recent article at the Daily Norseman, but since they produce so much hashtag content at the Daily Norseman, it'll be buried on the page, so you may have to search for it just a little bit. Even if you could just Google Teddy Bridgewater and Arif Hassan, you'll find it at the Daily Norseman.
And, I mean, let's be real. Arif doesn't make enough money as a blogger to pay for the free-range grass-fed goose. Do geese eat grass? The free-range grass-fed goose that he will be serving at Thanksgiving dinner. So do him a favor and check out that link at InsideThePylon.com.
Well, Inside the Pylon just featured it. The link is still at Norse Code, or at the Daily Norseman, so.
Well, yeah, but they've been. We want you to we want more clicks on the third thing. So InsideThePylon.com. Please direct your clicks there.
And then through there to back to the Daily Norseman. It's fun.
Norseman and Norse Code podcast. Just keep clicking all day on the holiday as you're like waiting for your uncle to fall asleep or whatever.
I would super not be opposed to that.
I would be totally okay with that. Hashtag clickbot. Further parting shots?
No, I think we're going to have a solid set of show notes, which will include links to various recipes, some not even mentioned on the show, some obviously already mentioned on the show, and some really, really good Atlanta Falcons breakdowns that talk a little bit more about things like the cover three, the way their offense operates, etc. If you are listening to this through an RSS, like via iTunes or Stitcher, be sure to head over to or Google Play. Be sure to head over to the Daily Norseman show page for Norse Code and click on some of those links because they're some pretty good stuff.
Oh, and it occurs to me that I have never mentioned this before on the show, but the show notes on the Daily Norseman are replicated on every episode page of NorseCodePodcast.com.
Are they? That's great. Fantastic.
Yeah, and actually, the only reason that is true is because I can literally like swoop the whole Daily Norseman page and copy and paste it right into the visual editor on WordPress, and all the links and stuff are intact. It's amazing.
Hooray!
And with that, we wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you so much for listening to the end of this excessively long podcast, as is our wont. And we'll rejoin you after the holiday break. Until then, our formula is this. Keep Teddy alive. We'll see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.